Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 14 true disturbing stories from the small towns and forgotten places of Indiana. These are tales of people who ventured into isolated hollows, abandoned homesteads, and deep forests and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The property sat about 8 miles outside Lubuti, down a gravel road that hadn't been maintained in what looked like decades. My Uncle Edwin had left it to me when he passed, along with a handwritten note that said I should sell it without visiting. I was 29 at the time and convinced I knew better. The farmhouse had been in our family since the 1880s, and I figured there might be antiques worth saving, maybe some old photographs. My girlfriend Brenna thought I was being ridiculous, driving 4 hours to poke around a condemned building, but she didn't argue when I left on a Saturday morning in October. The drive through southern Indiana was prettier than I expected. Rolling hills covered in trees just starting to turn, that particular smell of dry leaves and cool air. I'd printed out directions because my phone barely got signal once I left the highway. The gravel road wound through thick woods, and I remember thinking the canopy was so dense it felt like driving through a tunnel. The farmhouse appeared suddenly, a gray 2-story structure with a sagging porch and windows dark as empty eye sockets. The yard was overgrown with waist-high grass and thistles. I parked in what used to be a driveway and sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. The silence was immediate and total. No birds, no insects, no distant traffic hum. Just wind moving through the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and pry bar from the trunk. The front door was locked, but the wood around the frame was so rotted I barely had to lean on it before it gave way with a damp crunch. Inside smelled like mildew and mouse droppings. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I tested each step carefully, not wanting to crash through into whatever was below. Yellowed wallpaper peeled in long strips. There was an old couch in the front room, its fabric stained and torn, stuffing pulled out by animals. I spent maybe 20 minutes going through the ground floor, finding nothing but broken furniture and water damage. I was ready to head upstairs when I noticed the cellar door. It was set into the floor of what had been the kitchen, a wooden hatch with an iron ring handle. Most of the house felt abandoned in that sad, gradual way old buildings decay. But the cellar door looked deliberately sealed. Someone had driven nails around the edges, bent over to hold it shut. I crouched next to it, running my fingers over the nail heads. They weren't rusted. They were new, or at least newer than anything else in the house. I told myself it was probably just to keep animals out. Raccoons or possums getting in through foundation cracks, but something about those nails made my stomach feel cold and tight. I should have left then. Instead, I whipped the pry bar under the edge and started pulling nails. They came up easier than I expected, each one making a sharp squeal as it left the wood. When the last nail came free, I lifted the door. The smell that rolled up was wrong, not just old and musty, but organic, like meat that had been left out, mixed with something sweet and rotten. I pointed my flashlight down into the darkness. Stone steps led down about 12 feet to a dirt floor. The cellar was deeper than it should have been for a house this old, and wider. I could see old preserving jars on crude shelves, their contents long since blackened and unidentifiable. I descended slowly, the wooden steps groaning. The temperature dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath came out in small clouds. The cellar extended back under the entire house, maybe 40 feet deep, the far wall lost in shadow. That's when I saw the tunnel. It was cut into the back wall, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. Not a natural opening, but carved deliberately through the limestone. The edges were smooth, almost polished. I played my light into it but couldn't see where it ended, just dark tunnel stretching back into the earth. Next to the opening, someone had scratched marks into the wall. Tally marks, dozens of them, clustered in groups of 5. At the bottom, in what looked like charcoal or dried blood, someone had written, "Don't let them know you see." My mouth went dry. I should have turned around right then, gone back up those steps, gotten in my car and driven away. But I was thinking maybe this was some historical thing, some underground railroad tunnel or old mining operation. I crouched down and shined my light into the opening again. That's when I heard the breathing, not from the tunnel, from behind me near the base of the steps. Slow, measured breaths like someone sleeping. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing there. Just the stone steps, the shelves with their rotten jars, the packed dirt floor. The breathing continued, and then I realized it was coming from multiple places, in front of me, to my left, above me in the floor joists. Slow, synchronized breathing, at least 6 different sources, all perfectly timed. In, out, in, out. I backed toward the steps, trying to keep my light moving, but my hands were shaking so hard the beam jumped and danced. That's when I saw the dirt floor near the tunnel entrance. There were handprints pressed into it. Small handprints like a child's, dozens of them, all leading toward the tunnel mouth, but the fingers were too long. Each print showed fingers that extended at least 8 inches, thin as twigs. The breathing changed rhythm, faster now, excited. I ran for the steps, my boots slipping on the stone. Behind me I heard movement, but not footsteps. A dragging, sliding sound like something being pulled across the dirt. Multiple somethings. I scrambled up the steps, dropped my flashlight, didn't stop to retrieve it. The sound followed me up, getting closer. I could hear joints clicking, something that might have been whispering. I burst through the cellar door and slammed it shut, standing on it with my full weight. Something hit the underside hard enough to lift me an inch off the ground. Then again. The third impact was accompanied by a sound like fingernails on wood, but too many fingers, scraping in patterns. I could hear them moving around down there, circling below me. The scraping grew more frantic. I don't know how long I stood there. 5 minutes, 10. Eventually the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I could feel them waiting. I walked backward across the kitchen, never taking my eyes off the cellar door until I reached the front entrance. Then I ran to my car, fumbled with my keys, stabbed at the ignition 3 times before the engine caught. I didn't look at the house as I reversed down the driveway, didn't look in my rearview mirror until I was back on the paved highway. 3 days later, I went back in daylight with 2 friends. I'd convinced myself I'd panicked over nothing, maybe gotten spooked by the smell and my own imagination. We brought proper lights and a camera. The cellar door was open, wide open, resting against the floor. The nails I'd pulled were scattered around it. We went down together, all 3 of us. The tunnel was there, just like I remembered, but the tally marks on the wall were different. There were more of them now. At least 20 new groups of 5 had been added, and below the original message in the same dark substance, someone had written something new. He saw, he saw, he saw. We didn't go into the tunnel. We didn't stay to investigate. We went back up and I called a contractor the next day to have the property demolished. The whole thing, house, cellar, tunnel, everything. He called me after the crew finished and told me something strange. When they excavated the cellar, they found the tunnel extended back almost 200 feet before branching into a network. The workers kept hearing sounds in those tunnels, movement, breathing. They refused to go back and finish the job, even when I offered to triple their pay. I sold the land for almost nothing to a developer who wanted to clear it for a subdivision. Last I heard, they'd given up after 3 different construction crews quit. Something about the ground being unstable, they said, equipment malfunctioning, workers hearing things in the dirt. I still have nightmares about those handprints, about standing on that cellar door, feeling something underneath testing its weight, learning my rhythms. In the dreams, I can hear them breathing, still synchronized, still waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I remember that my Uncle Edwin's note didn't just say not to visit. It said not to visit again. Like I'd been there before. I don't have any memory of visiting that farmhouse as a child, but when I close my eyes, I can almost remember the dark, the tunnel, the sound of many hands dragging something through the earth. Story 2. Brown County State Park is beautiful in the spring when the dogwoods bloom and everything smells like new growth and rain. My brother Felix and I had been planning to hike the back trails since March, but work kept getting in the way. We finally made it out there on a Saturday in early May. Felix had just turned 32 and I was 3 years younger. We'd grown up camping with our dad, and even though we'd both moved to Indianapolis for work, we tried to get out into the woods at least once a month. The main trails were packed with families and retirees with their walking sticks and fanny packs. We wanted solitude, so we headed for the fire roads on the eastern edge of the park, where the maps showed nothing but green forest and topographic lines. The plan was to follow an old logging road about 4 miles in, then loop back on a deer trail Felix had found on satellite imagery. Easy day hike back to the car by sunset. The logging road was overgrown but passable, just 2 parallel ruts through the underbrush with grass and wildflowers growing between them. Birds were everywhere, warblers and woodpeckers, that constant soundtrack of spring forest. We talked about nothing important. Felix's divorce papers, my girlfriend's cat that kept pissing on my shoes, normal Saturday conversation. About 2 miles in, we found the markers. They were subtle at first. Small stacks of stones, 3 or 4 rocks balanced on top of each other, placed at intervals along the road. I almost walked past the first one before Felix pointed it out. We both stopped to look at it. The stones were arranged carefully, deliberately, not something that would happen naturally. Trail marker, Felix said. Maybe, but this isn't a marked trail. We kept walking. The stone stacks appeared every 100 yards or so, always on the left side of the road. Then we started noticing other things. Bits of cloth tied to branches, faded and weathered but clearly placed. Twine strung between trees at chest height like someone marking a boundary. And scratches on the bark, not random but deliberate cuts forming shapes I didn't recognize. The forest had gotten quieter. I realized I couldn't hear any birds anymore. The temperature felt different too, cooler despite the afternoon sun. Felix had stopped talking, and we were both just walking, paying attention to the woods around us in a way that felt necessary. That's when we saw the cabin. It sat in a small clearing about 50 yards off the logging road, barely visible through the trees. Old, maybe pre-Depression era, built from hand-hewn logs that had gone gray with age. The roof had partially collapsed, and the single window was just a dark rectangular hole. But what caught my attention were the objects hanging from the porch eave. Dolls, maybe a dozen of them, suspended by wire or string. They twisted slowly in the breeze, their faces turned toward us. They'd been out there long enough that weather had stripped most of the paint and fabric, leaving behind bleached plastic and stained cloth. But they were arranged deliberately, hanging at different heights, forming a pattern I couldn't quite parse. "We should check it out," Felix said, but his voice sounded uncertain. "Should we? We've come this far." We left the logging road and walked toward the cabin. The ground was soft underfoot, decades of leaf litter and moss. As we got closer, I could see more details. Someone had stacked firewood against one wall, but the logs were so rotted they'd fused together into a solid mass. The porch steps had collapsed into splinters, and the dolls, up close they were worse. Some had faces scratched away. Others had been taken apart and reassembled wrong, heads on backward, limbs in incorrect positions. Felix reached the porch first. He was looking up at the dolls with an expression I couldn't read. Why would someone do this? I don't know. Can we go? But he was already moving around the side of the cabin toward the back. I followed because staying alone in front of those dolls felt worse than following him. The back of the cabin had no door, just an opening where a door used to be. Inside was dark and thick with the smell of rotting wood and animal musk. Felix pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The cabin was a single room, maybe 12 by 12 feet. Empty except for a rusted bed frame in one corner and a pile of moldering fabric that might have been blankets. The walls had writing on them, carved into the logs, scratched over and over in what looked like the same handwriting. Single phrases repeated hundreds of times: ITWATCHES from the ridge, ITWATCHES from the ridge, ITWATCHES from the ridge. Okay, this is fucked up, Felix said. Let's go. I agreed completely. We turned to leave, and that's when I saw the photographs. They were tacked to the wall beside the door opening, maybe 20 of them arranged in a grid. Polaroids, faded and water damaged, but still visible. They all showed the same thing, the cabin from different angles, taken at different times of day, and in every single photograph there was a figure standing in the woods behind the cabin. Always in the same spot, always partially obscured by trees, never quite in focus. Tall and thin, motionless. Felix, I said quietly, look at these. He came over, shining his light on the photographs. We stood there for maybe 10 seconds, both of us staring before the same thought hit us simultaneously. Those photos showed the view behind the cabin, the direction we'd just come from. We walked out of that cabin faster than we'd entered. I wanted to run, but some part of my brain insisted that running would be worse, would trigger something. We made it back to the logging road and started heading the way we'd come, moving at just below a jog. The stone markers were still there, but now I noticed something I'd missed before. They weren't just stacks of rocks, they were arranged to point. Each stack tilted slightly, the top rock angled like a finger, all of them directing our attention to the left, toward the ridge that rose above the logging road. I couldn't help myself. I looked. The ridge was maybe 200 yards away, steep and covered in trees. And standing among those trees, perfectly still, was a figure. It was too far away to see clearly, but I could make out the general shape. Tall, taller than any person should be, thin, arms that hung down past where its knees should be. It wasn't moving, just standing there, oriented toward us. Don't look at it, Felix said, his voice tight. Just keep walking. We walked. Faster now, not quite running. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, but I could feel that presence on the ridge, following, keeping pace with us. The stone markers continued appearing on our left, each one pointing toward the ridge, toward that watching figure. A quarter mile later, Felix grabbed my arm. It's closer. I looked despite myself. He was right. The figure had moved down the ridge, was now standing among the trees at the base, maybe 100 yards away. I still couldn't make out features, just that wrong silhouette, those arms hanging down, down, down. We started running. The logging road seemed longer than I remembered. The stone markers blurred past, one after another, all pointing. I could hear something behind us now, not footsteps, but a dragging sound, branches breaking. It was moving faster than us, cutting through the underbrush while we were confined to the road. Felix pulled ahead of me. He'd always been the faster runner. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, boots pounding the packed earth. The sound behind us grew louder. Something crashed through the trees to our left, parallel to us, hidden by the undergrowth but keeping pace. Then Felix screamed. He stopped dead in the middle of the road, staring at something. I nearly crashed into him. Ahead of us, blocking the logging road, was another stone marker. But this one was different. Built from dozens of rocks, at least 4 feet tall, and sitting on top of it was a doll. One of the hanging dolls from the cabin, its head twisted completely around, its empty eye sockets pointed back toward us. It's hurting us, Felix whispered. The sound in the trees had stopped. The forest was completely silent. I turned slowly, looking back the way we'd come. The figure stood in the middle of the logging road, maybe 50 yards behind us. Close enough now that I could see details. The arms were wrong. Too long, jointed in too many places. each joint bending in a way that made my eyes hurt to follow. The head was tilted at an angle like a bird examining prey, and it was swaying. Side to side, a rhythmic motion, almost hypnotic. "Off the road," I said, "into the forest, now." We crashed into the underbrush on the right side of the road, away from the ridge. Thorns tore at my clothes. Low branches whipped my face. Behind us, I could hear that dragging sound again, but different now. Faster, multiple limbs pulling something through the brush. I have no idea how long we ran. Time compressed into pure panic. I remember Felix ahead of me, remember dodging trees, remember the ground suddenly dropping away and sliding down a hillside on my ass, grabbing at roots and rocks to slow my descent. At the bottom was a creek, shallow and moving fast. We splashed through it and kept running, and somewhere in that desperate flight the sounds behind us faded. We found a different fire road eventually. Followed it until we hit a marked trail, then followed that until we saw other hikers. A family with kids. The dad asked if we were okay, said we looked like we'd seen a ghost. Felix laughed high and strained and said we'd gotten lost. We made it back to the parking lot as the sun was setting. In the car, neither of us spoke for 10 minutes. Finally, Felix said, "What was that?" "I don't know. Should we report it?" "Report what?" "We got lost and panicked." He nodded slowly. We drove back to Indianapolis, and I don't think either of us said more than 20 words the whole way. I didn't think about it much in the following days, tried to convince myself we'd overreacted, gotten spooked by some creepy art installation and our own adrenaline. But 2 weeks later, Felix called me at 3 in the morning. "It was in my backyard," he said. His voice was shaking. "Tonight, I got up to get water and I looked out the kitchen window and it was standing by my fence. Just standing there, swaying. Felix." I turned on the porch light and it was gone. But there are marks in the grass where it was standing, pressed down like something heavy was there. "And Jordan," he stopped, breathing hard. "There's a stone marker on my porch, 3 rocks stacked up. I don't know how it got there, I don't know what it means." I drove to his place immediately. The stone marker was there, sitting right by his front door. We knocked it over, scattered the rocks. I stayed with him until sunrise, both of us sitting in his living room with the lights on, watching the backyard through the window. The stones were stacked again the next morning. Same place, same configuration. We took them down, threw them in the garbage. They came back. Every time we removed them, they reappeared within hours. Felix tried setting up a camera, but the footage showed nothing, just empty porch, and then suddenly the stones were there, as if they'd always been there. He moved out 2 months later, rented an apartment on the opposite side of the city. The stones stopped appearing, but sometimes late at night he says he can hear it outside his window, that dragging sound. Branches breaking, something tall and thin moving through the manicured lawns and parking lots looking for the right unit, the right window. I don't go hiking anymore. Can't bring myself to drive past those woods. I keep thinking about those photographs in the cabin, that figure standing in the background of every shot. How many pictures had been taken? How long had it been standing there waiting for someone to notice? And how many other cabins are scattered through those forests, covered in warnings that no one reads until it's too late? Felix sent me a text last week. Just 4 words. The stones came back. I haven't responded yet. I don't know what to say. Story 3. The limestone quarries around Bedford have been abandoned since the 70s, when the company that owned them went bankrupt. Growing up in southern Indiana, I'd heard stories about them. Kids sneaking in to swim in the flooded pits, teenagers having parties in the old processing buildings. I never paid much attention until I got hired to do a land survey. The current owner wanted to assess the property for potential development, needed maps and geological surveys before deciding whether to sell or try to reclaim it. I was 34 at the time, had been doing surveying work for about 8 years. Decent job, mostly outdoors, which I preferred to being stuck in an office. The quarry job was supposed to take 3 days, walk the property lines, mark boundaries, check for structural stability in the old buildings. Standard stuff. The owner offered me $1,500 for the job, which was more than fair, and I was only 20 minutes from home, so I could sleep in my own bed at night. I started on a Wednesday in late September. The weather was perfect, mid-60s and partly cloudy. The quarry sat at the end of a long dirt access road, surrounded by chain-link fence that was mostly rusted through and falling over. I parked my truck outside the main gate and unloaded my equipment. Theodolite GPS unit, measuring wheel, camera for documentation. I'd studied the property maps the night before. The quarry covered about 60 acres with 3 main excavation pits and a cluster of processing buildings on the northeast corner. The first day went fine. I mapped the perimeter, took elevation readings, photographed the fence line. The excavation pits were impressive, massive craters carved into the bedrock, some of them flooded with rainwater that had turned the color of jade. The water was probably 200 feet deep in places. I stayed well back from the edges, mindful of unstable ground. The processing buildings were more interesting. There were 5 of them, all constructed from corrugated metal and concrete blocks, all in various states of decay. Rust had eaten through the walls in places, and the roofs had collapsed on 2 of them. I needed to check inside each structure to assess stability and note any hazards. The first 3 were empty shells, just concrete floors and rusted machinery parts. Nothing remarkable. The 4th building was different. It was the largest of the 5, maybe 60 feet long and 30 wide. The main entrance had been padlocked at some point, but someone had cut through the chain years ago. Inside smelled like mineral dust and old metal. There was more equipment in this one, conveyor systems, hoppers, crushing machinery, all locked in place by rust. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as I walked through, taking photographs and notes. At the back of the building was a freight elevator shaft. The elevator car was gone, just a dark rectangular opening in the floor with metal rails disappearing down into blackness. I shined my flashlight down the shaft. The beam didn't reach the bottom. According to the property plans, there was a lower level used for storage and maintenance, maybe 40 feet down. I'd need to check it tomorrow, see if there was another access point. I was turning away from the shaft when I heard the sound, scraping, metal on concrete, coming from below. I stopped listening. The building was completely silent otherwise, just the wind moving through gaps in the walls. Then the scraping came again, deliberate and rhythmic. Drag, pause, something being pulled across a floor. "Hello," I called down the shaft. My voice echoed weirdly, bouncing off stone and metal. The scraping stopped. I waited 30 seconds, nothing. I told myself it was probably just something loose down there, maybe an animal that had fallen in and was trying to climb out. I made a note to check the lower level in the morning, then finished documenting the building and headed back to my truck. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the sound. Something about the rhythm bothered me. It was too regular, too measured, not random or panicked like an injured animal would make. The next day I came back with climbing rope and a harness. I'd found a maintenance ladder in one of the other buildings, and I managed to lower it into the elevator shaft, securing it to the supports with the rope. The ladder reached bottom after about 35 feet. I grabbed my best flashlight, checked my phone, no signal down here, and started descending. The lower level was cold, maybe 15 degrees cooler than up top. My breath came out in small clouds. The floor was concrete, covered in dust and debris. There were rooms branching off from the main chamber, most of them small storage spaces filled with rotted wooden crates and rusted tools. I swept each room with my light, documenting everything. The last room was at the far end, behind a metal door that hung open on broken hinges. Inside were filing cabinets, their drawers hanging open and empty. An old desk. A bulletin board with yellowed papers still tacked to it. I walked over to look at the papers, work schedules from 1973, safety notices, a faded photograph of the quarry workers. That's when I noticed the scratches on the wall. They covered the concrete behind the desk, hundreds of thin lines carved into the surface. Not random, deliberate marks forming words. I had to angle my flashlight to read them. The same phrase repeated over and over, covering a 6-foot section of wall. They live in the stone, they live in the stone, they live in the stone. My skin went cold. I backed away from the desk, my light sweeping the room. That's when I saw the hole. It was in the back corner, low to the ground, maybe 2 feet in diameter. A perfect circle carved through the concrete wall. Beyond it was darkness. I crouched down, shining my light into the opening. The hole extended back into solid bedrock, angling downward. I could see marks on the stone surface, long scratches like something with claws had dug its way through. From somewhere deep in that tunnel, I heard breathing. Not the scraping from yesterday. Actual breathing. Multiple sources synchronized, in and out, slow and steady, and underneath that sound something else. A faint clicking like joints popping or stones grinding together. I stood up fast, banging my head on the doorframe. The breathing continued unchanged. I backed out of the room, moving toward the elevator shaft. The clicking sound grew louder, not coming from the tunnel anymore, coming from multiple directions. The storage rooms I'd just checked, behind me, above me. I ran for the ladder and started climbing. My boots slipped on the rungs, the rope harness tangling. Below me I heard movement, not footsteps, a sliding, dragging sound, multiple somethings emerging into the main chamber. I climbed faster, not looking down. My flashlight was swinging wildly on its lanyard, throwing crazy shadows. 3/4 of the way up, I made the mistake of glancing down. They were at the base of the ladder, 3 of them. Maybe 4, they were clustered together, and it was hard to distinguish where one ended and another began. Pale, humanoid but wrong. Their limbs were too long and segmented in too many places. The way they moved was fluid, boneless, like water flowing upward, and their heads, I couldn't process what I was seeing. Smooth and eyeless, but I could feel them looking at me. One of them started climbing the ladder. It moved fast, its 2 long arms reaching up, those segmented fingers wrapping around the rungs. I screamed and scrambled the rest of the way up, pulling myself out of the shaft. I could hear it behind me, climbing steadily. I grabbed the rope and started hauling the ladder up. It came about 6 feet before resistance hit. The thing was holding on, its weight making the ladder swing. I pulled harder, leaning back, using my full body weight. The ladder came up another foot, then another. I could see fingers appearing over the edge of the shaft, pale and too long, nails that were more like talons. I let go of the rope and ran for the building entrance. Behind me, I heard something heavy hit the concrete floor, followed by that sliding sound, fast now pursuing. I burst out of the building into daylight and didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, grabbed them, finally got the door open and dove inside. I sat there for 5 minutes, engine running, doors locked, staring at the processing building. Nothing emerged. The entrance remained empty. Eventually, my breathing slowed and I started to feel ridiculous. Had I really seen anything? It was dark down there. I was already on edge from those scratches on the wall, easy to panic and see things that weren't there. I drove home and spent the evening trying to convince myself of that. Just shadows and panic, nothing more. The next morning, I called the property owner and told him I needed to access the lower level again to complete the survey. He told me not to bother. Said the structural engineer had already flagged the whole building as unsafe, too expensive to rehabilitate. They'd be demolishing it anyway. I didn't argue, but I couldn't let it go. That hole in the wall, those scratches, the things I'd seen or thought I'd seen. 3 days later, I drove back to the quarry, bringing high-powered flashlights and a camera. I told myself I just needed to document it properly, prove to myself there was a rational explanation. The ladder was gone. Not pulled back up into the building, not lying on the floor, just gone. I shined my light down the elevator shaft. The bottom was too dark to see clearly, but I could make out shapes moving down there, pale shapes sliding and circling. And along the walls of the shaft I could see new marks. Long scratches in the concrete, fresh-looking, dozens of them. Like something had been climbing up and down, over and over, wearing grooves into the stone. I took photographs from the edge of the shaft, using my telephoto lens. When I got home and looked at them on my computer, I had to sit down. The images showed at least 7 figures at the bottom of the shaft, clustered around where the ladder had been. In 2 of the photos, one of them was looking up directly at the camera. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle, and even though it had no eyes, no features at all except a lipless slash where a mouth should be, I knew it was aware of me, seeing me. I sent the photos to the property owner along with my completed survey, noting significant safety hazards in Building 4 and recommending immediate demolition. I didn't mention what I'd seen or what the photos showed. How could I explain that? But I included a recommendation that they seal the elevator shaft with concrete before bringing in the demolition crew. I don't know if they listened. I didn't follow up. That was 8 months ago. I've been doing office work since then, handling administrative tasks for the surveying company. They keep asking when I'll be ready to go back out into the field. I keep making excuses. Last week I drove past the quarry access road, couldn't help myself. There was a new chain across the entrance with a sign, property sold, no trespassing. I don't know who bought it or what they're planning. Part of me hopes they've already demolished everything, filled in those pits, sealed whatever tunnels run through the bedrock. But I keep thinking about those scratches on the wall. They live in the stone. Southern Indiana is riddled with limestone formations, old quarries and mines, tunnels and caves that go down for miles. What else lives in those spaces? How many other quarries have holes carved in their walls, leading down into the deep places? I still have the photographs on my computer. Sometimes late at night I look at them, zooming in on those pale figures, trying to understand what I'm seeing. And in the most recent photos, the ones I took from the shaft opening, I noticed something I'd missed before. On the wall behind the creatures, fresh scratches. Letters scraped into the concrete. 3 words repeated over and over. He came back, he came back, he came back. Story 4. My Aunt Patricia died in January, and her lawyer contacted me in February to say she'd left me her property. I barely remembered her. We'd only met twice when I was a kid, both times at family reunions where she sat in the corner chain-smoking and didn't talk to anyone. She'd lived alone in a cabin outside Nashville, Indiana for the last 30 years. No husband, no kids, just her and 40 acres of woods. The lawyer said she'd been very specific in her will. The property went to me, her nephew Graham, under one condition. I had to spend 3 nights there before I could sell it. Stay in the cabin alone for 72 consecutive hours. If I agreed, the property was mine. If I refused, it went to some conservation trust. I was 27, working retail management and living in a studio apartment in Fort Wayne. 40 acres of land worth maybe $200,000. Of course I agreed. 3 nights in a cabin sounded like a vacation. The lawyer looked at me funny when I signed the papers, like he wanted to say something. But he just handed me the keys and an envelope with my aunt's handwriting on the outside. Read this after the first night. I drove down on a Thursday in late March. The cabin was about 6 miles outside Nashville proper, down a dirt road that got progressively narrower until it was barely wide enough for my Honda. The woods were thick with bare trees, everything still waiting for spring. The cabin appeared around a bend, a small log structure with a metal roof and a stone chimney. It looked rustic but maintained, no visible decay. Inside was cleaner than I expected. 1 main room with a kitchenette, wood stove, couch and table. A small bedroom with a metal frame bed, bathroom with a composting toilet and a shower fed by rainwater catchment. No electricity, but there were oil lamps and a good supply of firewood. My aunt's belongings were still there, clothes in the closet, food in the pantry, books stacked on shelves. It felt wrong going through a dead woman's things, but I reminded myself she'd wanted me to have this. I spent the afternoon settling in, getting a fire going in the stove, making coffee on a propane camp stove I found under the sink. There was a generator in a small shed out back, but I couldn't get it started. No big deal. I had my phone for light, though there was no signal. The first night was fine, quiet. I made dinner, read one of my aunt's books, a paperback mystery from the 80s, and went to bed around 10. I woke up once around 3 a.m. because something outside made a sound like a woman screaming, probably a fox or a bobcat. I lay there listening for a while, but it didn't repeat. I fell back asleep. In the morning, I remembered the envelope. I found it in my jacket and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper in my aunt's handwriting. Graham, if you're reading this, you've survived the first night. 2 more to go. Some rules you need to follow. 1. Do not go outside after sunset. 2. Do not open the door after sunset, no matter what you hear. 3. Do not look out the windows after sunset. 4. Keep the fire in the stove burning all night. 5. If you hear your name, do not answer. This place has been in our family for 4 generations. Someone has to stay. Someone has to keep the watch. I'm sorry it has to be you now. Love, Aunt Patricia. I read it 3 times. My first reaction was to laugh. Some kind of joke, right? Playing on the creepy isolated cabin trope. But the handwriting was shaky, like she'd been scared while writing it, or sick. She died of a stroke, the lawyer had said, found in her bed by a postal worker who'd noticed mail piling up. I spent the second day exploring the property. The 40 acres were dense forest with a stream running through the western edge. I found an old root cellar about 50 yards from the cabin, its wooden door padlocked. I found stone markers scattered through the woods, limestone blocks with dates carved into them going back to 1891. I found 3 different fire pits arranged in a triangle, each exactly 100 yards from the cabin. And I found the photographs. They were nailed to trees, at least 30 of them, scattered throughout the woods in a rough perimeter around the cabin. Polaroids in plastic bags to protect them from weather. They all showed the same thing, the cabin from different angles, different seasons. And in every photo there were figures in the background, standing among the trees. Watching, they were too distant to see clearly, but I could make out the basic shapes. Tall, too tall, and there were always 3 of them, evenly spaced, standing perfectly still. I took several of the photographs down and brought them back to the cabin. In better light, I could see more details, but they didn't make things clearer. The figures were humanoid, but their proportions were wrong. Arms too long, heads too large, and their skin, if it was skin, was pale, almost luminous in the photos. That second night, I followed my aunt's rules. I didn't look out the windows after dark, kept the fire burning, stayed inside with the door locked. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, measured, too heavy to be a raccoon or deer. They walked from one end of the porch to the other, then back. This repeated for maybe 20 minutes, then silence. At 2 a.m., something knocked on the door, 3 sharp knocks evenly spaced. I sat on the couch, staring at that door, telling myself not to answer. The knocking came again, then a voice muffled through the wood. Graham, honey, it's so cold out here. Please let me in." My mother's voice. Exactly her voice, her cadence, the way she'd called me honey my whole childhood. But my mother lived in Michigan. There was no way she was here. I didn't answer, didn't move. "Graham, I know you can hear me. I drove all this way to check on you. Please open the door." The voice was perfect. No distortion, no obvious wrongness. If I hadn't been sitting there reading my aunt's note, I would have opened the door. Instead, I sat frozen, my hands clamped over my mouth to keep from responding. The voice kept trying for an hour. pleading, then angry, then crying. Finally it stopped, but I could hear something outside the door, breathing, waiting. It stayed there until sunrise. I know because I didn't sleep, just sat on that couch watching the door, listening to that slow, patient breathing. When dawn light started filtering through the windows, I heard footsteps retreating off the porch. I waited another 30 minutes before I worked up the courage to look outside. The porch was empty, but there were marks on the door, scratches in the wood, 5 parallel lines like someone had dragged their fingers down the surface. Except the lines were spaced too far apart, at least 8 inches between each one. I should have left then. Screw the inheritance, but I only had one night left. Just one more night, then this property was mine and I could sell it and never come back. I spent the 3rd day in the cabin, keeping the fire going, reading my aunt's books, trying not to think about what the night would bring. I found her journal in the bedroom, tucked under the mattress. I almost didn't open it, felt like violating something private, but I needed to understand. The entries went back 15 years. Most were mundane, weather observations, notes about garden work, lists of supplies. But scattered throughout were other entries. April 3rd, they were at the markers again last night. 3 of them just standing, watching. I kept the fire burning, did not look. September 17th, found deer carcass near the south marker. Bones broken in ways that don't make sense. Something is feeding. January 8th, they tried mother's voice tonight. Perfect mimicry. I almost opened the door. Almost. Must remember. Must not listen. July 22nd, saw them in daylight. Just for a moment. They moved behind the trees before I could focus, but I saw enough. No wonder the early ones built the markers. No wonder someone must stay. The last entry was dated 3 days before she died. I'm tired, so tired. 40 years of watching, of staying, of keeping the fire burning. I've chosen Graham. He's young, strong, smarter than I was. Maybe he'll find a way to end this. Maybe he'll just maintain the watch like I did, like mother did, like grandmother did. The property must not stand empty. They grow bold when no one watches. I've seen what happens in the places people abandon. I'm sorry, Graham. I'm so sorry. I sat on the bed holding that journal, feeling sick. My aunt hadn't left me an inheritance. She'd left me a responsibility, a prison. The 3rd night was the worst. It started with the footsteps on the porch around 11 p.m., but this time they were accompanied by scratching, not on the door, on the walls, the windows, moving around the cabin in a slow circle. I could hear them outside each window as I passed, long scratches, deliberate and measured. Then came the voices, not my mother this time, my aunt, then my father, then my girlfriend, then people I worked with, friends from high school, my 3rd grade teacher, every voice perfect. All of them begging me to open the door, let them in. It was so cold, so dark. Please, Graham, please. I sat by the fire and didn't answer. The wood stove was burning hot, but I kept feeding it logs. My aunt's rules: keep the fire burning, don't answer, don't look. Around 3 a.m., something started climbing on the roof. I could hear it up there, moving across the metal with soft tapping sounds. Not footsteps, too many impacts, like something with multiple limbs. It moved back and forth, then settled near the chimney. I watched smoke from the stove start to curl back into the room. Something was blocking the flue. The cabin filled with smoke quickly. My eyes watered, my throat burned. I opened the stove door, trying to let smoke escape that way, but it wasn't enough. I was going to suffocate if I didn't do something. Open a window. Just crack it open, let the smoke out. I reached for the window latch, and that's when I saw the reflection in the glass. There was a face looking in, pressed against the window on the other side, just inches away. A face, but not a face. Too long, too narrow, skin pulled tight over bone. No nose, no ears, just eyes, huge eyes that reflected the firelight, and a mouth that split the lower half of the head, opening and opening and opening, wider than any mouth should open, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass. I backed away from the window, stumbling over the coffee table. The smoke was thick now, burning my lungs. On the roof, that thing was making sounds, not words, not animal sounds, something in between rhythmic and repetitive, almost like chanting. I remembered the bathroom had a small vent. I stumbled through the smoke, found the bathroom, shut the door behind me. The vent was tiny, but it pulled some of the smoke out. I sat on the floor, a wet towel pressed to my face, listening to the sounds outside. The chanting, the scratching, the voices pleading and crying and screaming. It lasted until dawn. When the first light hit the cabin, everything stopped. The sound ceased instantly, like a switch had been flipped. I waited 10 minutes before I opened the bathroom door. The smoke had cleared, drawn up through the chimney. I checked the stove. Something had fallen down the flue during the night. A mass of sticks and moss, carefully arranged to block the opening. I pulled it out and burned it. The scratches on the walls were real, deep gouges in the wood circling the entire cabin. On the porch, I found more of those 5-lined marks, and in the dirt around the cabin, footprints, dozens of them, but they weren't human. Too long, too narrow, with toe impressions that looked more like talons. I left that morning, drove straight to the lawyer's office and signed whatever papers made the property mine. Then I listed it for sale. I've had 17 potential buyers come look at it in the last 2 months. None of them have made offers. The realtor says there's something about the place that makes people uncomfortable. They can't quite explain it, they just don't want to be there. Last week, the realtor called. She'd gotten a call from a neighbor down the road, asking if anyone was staying at the cabin. She'd seen smoke coming from the chimney every night for the past week. But the cabin has been empty. I haven't been back. No one has keys, except me. I drove down there yesterday just to check. The fire in the stove was burning. The wood box was full of fresh logs. The oil lamps were lit. And on the table was a note in my aunt's handwriting, though she's been dead for 4 months. Someone must keep the watch. I don't know what to do. I can't stay there. I can't maintain whatever my aunt was maintaining, whatever 4 generations of my family have been doing. But I'm starting to understand what happens if the property stands empty. I'm starting to see them in Fort Wayne. At night on my street, standing under the streetlights, 3 of them evenly spaced, just standing, watching. They're waiting for me to come back. Story 5. I got hired to photograph a wedding at Turkey Run State Park, which should have been easy money. The couple wanted outdoor shots, specifically near the abandoned ice house in the northwest corner of the park. I'd been doing photography professionally for about 2 years, mostly events and portraits. The gig paid $1,200 for 6 hours of work, which was way above my usual rate. The bride said her family had a connection to Turkey Run, that her great-grandfather had worked there in the 1920s, and she wanted to honor that. The wedding was scheduled for mid-afternoon on a Saturday in October. I arrived around noon to scout locations and test lighting. The ice house was about a 1-mile hike from the nearest parking area, down a ravine trail that was steep enough to require some scrambling. The structure itself was built into a hillside, stone walls, covered in moss and small trees growing out of cracks in the roof. One side had collapsed years ago, leaving a dark opening into the interior. I took some test shots, checking angles and exposure. The place was beautiful in that abandoned, overgrown way that photographs love. Light filtering through the trees, autumn colors, the stone dark and textured. I ventured inside the ice house to check for interior shots. It was just one large chamber, maybe 30 by 20 feet, with a high ceiling. The floor was covered in leaves and debris. The air was cold and damp, smelled like earth and decay. I was setting up my tripod when I noticed the marks on the walls. They were carved into the stone, hundreds of them covering every surface within reach. Symbols I didn't recognize. Some looked like letters, but not any alphabet I knew. Others were pictographic, crude drawings of figures, trees, eyes. They varied in age. Some were weathered and barely visible. Others looked fresh, the stone pale where it had been recently carved. I took photographs of the markings. The couple might not want them in the wedding photos, but I thought they were interesting from a historical perspective. Maybe the work of Depression-era laborers or old Native American symbols. I made a mental note to look them up later. The wedding party arrived around 2 p.m., 15 people total, including the bride and groom, Angela and Marcus Chen. They were in their late 20s, both from Indianapolis. Both seemed relaxed and happy. The ceremony was simple, officiated by a friend. I took probably 200 photos, candids during the ceremony, group shots afterward, couples' portraits with the ice house as backdrop. Everything was going fine until we did the interior shots. The couple wanted a few dramatic photos inside the ice house, with light coming through the collapsed wall. I set up my off-camera flash, positioned them near the back wall, started shooting. I took maybe 10 shots before Angela said, "Is someone else here?" I lowered my camera. "What?" She was looking past me, toward the entrance. "I thought I saw someone in the doorway." We all looked. The entrance was empty, afternoon light streaming in, nothing else. "Probably just a hiker," Marcus said. We continued shooting, but I noticed Angela kept glancing toward the entrance, distracted. After a few more shots, she said, "Can we do the rest outside? It's cold in here." We moved back outside, finished the session with golden hour portraits near the ravine. The light was perfect. Everyone was happy. The party hiked back to the parking lot around 5:30. I packed up my gear and followed, planning to go home and start editing. I got about halfway up the trail when I realized I'd left one of my lens caps near the ice house. Stupid mistake. The cap was expensive, and I didn't want to leave it. I told the couple to go ahead, I'd catch up. I turned around and headed back down the trail. The sun was setting, and the ravine was already deep in shadow. I should have grabbed my headlamp from the car first, but I figured it would be quick. Just grab the lens cap and head back up. I reached the ice house in about 5 minutes. The temperature had dropped noticeably, my breath visible in small clouds. I found the lens cap right where I'd left it, near the collapsed wall. I pocketed it and turned to leave. That's when I heard voices inside the ice house. Multiple voices speaking in low tones. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm was conversational. I called out, "Hello, someone there?" The voices stopped. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight app, stepped through the entrance into the main chamber. Empty, but something felt wrong. The space was darker than it should be, like my phone light wasn't penetrating as far as it should. And the air, it smelled different. Not like damp earth anymore, like copper, like blood. The marks on the walls looked different. I couldn't explain how, but they seemed more prominent, like they were raised from the stone surface instead of carved into it. I moved closer, shining my light across the symbols. That's when I noticed some of them were wet, glistening, like they'd been traced recently with something dark and viscous. Behind me, someone said, "You came back." I spun around. A man stood in the entrance to the ice house. Old, maybe 70, wearing dirty clothes and a hunting jacket. His face was gaunt, deeply lined. His eyes caught my phone light and reflected it back like an animal's eyes. "I didn't mean to intrude," I said. "I was just getting something I left." "You took pictures," not a question. "I was photographing a wedding. I'm a photographer." "Of the marks. You took pictures of the marks." I nodded slowly. Something about this interaction felt wrong. The way he stood perfectly still, the way he didn't blink. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. His voice was flat, affectless. "They don't like to be documented." "Who does?" He didn't answer, just stood there blocking the exit, staring at me with those reflective eyes. Then very slowly he smiled. His teeth were wrong, too many of them overlapping in rows. I backed away, moving deeper into the ice house. "I'm going to leave now. I'm sorry if I disturbed anything." "Too late," he said, and he stepped aside, gesturing to the exit. "Go ahead, leave." I didn't trust it, but I didn't have another option. I walked toward the entrance, giving him a wide berth. As I passed, he said, "Check your pictures when you get home. Really look at them, you'll see." I practically ran up the trail. By the time I reached the parking lot, full dark had fallen. My car was the only one left. I drove back to Indianapolis going 10 over the speed limit the whole way, checking my rearview mirror constantly. At home, I transferred the photos to my computer and started going through them. The wedding shots were fine. Good, actually. Angela and Marcus would be happy. But the photos I'd taken of the ice house interior, the ones with the carved marks, those were different. In every single one there were figures, standing in the background, arranged in a circle around where the couple had been posing, in the shadows, barely visible but definitely there. Humanoid shapes, but wrong. Their proportions were off, their limbs too long, their heads tilted at angles that made my eyes hurt to look at. I zoomed in on one figure. The image got grainy, but I could see enough. Its skin was pale and looked wet, glistening like the symbols on the wall. It had no clothes, its arms hung down past its knees, and its face, it was turned toward the camera, toward me. It had too many eyes. They covered the upper half of its face in a cluster, at least a dozen of them, all different sizes. I checked every photo. They were in all of them, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, sometimes more, clustered in the darker corners where my flash hadn't fully illuminated. And in the last photos, the ones taken right before Angela had asked to leave, the figures had moved closer. They were right behind the couple. One of them had its hand extended, almost touching Angela's shoulder. I don't know what to do with these photos. I can't deliver them to the couple, but I can't explain why without sounding insane. I sent Angela the outdoor shots, said there had been a problem with the interior files, offered to do a reshoot for free. She said not to worry about it, they had plenty of good photos. But 3 days ago, Angela called me. Her voice was shaky. She asked if anything weird had happened at the ice house after they'd left. I said no, why? She told me that Marcus had been having nightmares. The same nightmare every night. He's in the ice house, and things are standing around him in a circle, watching. They get closer each night. Last night, he said they touched him, and she's been having problems too. She keeps seeing movement in her peripheral vision. Figures standing in places they shouldn't be, in her backyard at night, in the parking garage at her office, always at the edge of her vision, always disappearing when she turns to look directly. I told her I didn't know anything. Told her it was probably just stress from the wedding and starting married life. But I've been seeing them too, in my apartment, standing in the hallway outside my door. I can see them through the peephole, 3 figures perfectly still, facing my door. They're there every night now. I've stopped looking. Last night I dreamed about the ice house. I was inside, lying on the floor covered in leaves. The figures were standing over me in a circle, looking down. They were carving something on my skin with their 2 long fingers. Symbols, the same symbols from the walls. When I woke up, I had scratches on my arms and chest. Thin, precise lines, not deep, barely bleeding, but arranged in patterns. Symbols. I looked them up online, spent hours searching, finally found a reference in a blog about Indiana folklore. The ice house at Turkey Run was built on top of something older, a ceremonial site used by people who lived in the area long before European settlement. The symbols were warnings, boundary markers. This place was not for the living. And according to the blog, every few decades, someone breaks the boundary, takes something from the site, or damages the warnings or photographs the markings. And the things that live there, the things that were sealed there, they follow that person home. I'm writing this at 4 a.m. They're in my bedroom. I can hear them moving around, slow and deliberate. I haven't opened my eyes. I don't want to see them up close. I can feel them near the bed, feel their weight making the mattress shift. Something cold touches my face, tracing the scratches on my skin. I don't know what they want. I don't know how to make this stop. I've deleted all the photos, reformatted my memory cards, smashed my hard drive. But it doesn't matter, they're still here. If anyone reads this, don't go to the ice house at Turkey Run. Don't photograph the symbols, don't take anything. And if you've already been there, if you've already seen the marks, check your photos, really look at them. And whatever you do, don't look in the shadows of your room when you hear them moving. They don't like to be seen directly. Story 6. Shade State Park has some of the best ravines in Indiana, deep sandstone cuts with trails that snake along cliff faces and through narrow passages. My friend Olivia Brennan and I had been planning a hiking trip there since summer, but work kept getting in the way. We finally made it out on a Friday in late November. The park was nearly empty. Most people don't hike in November, with the leaves gone and the temperature dropping. We parked at the main lot around 9 a.m. and headed for the Devil's Punch Bowl Trail. It's a moderate hike, maybe 4 miles round trip that loops through a heavily forested ravine. The trail follows Sugar Creek for part of the way, then climbs up along the canyon walls before descending back to the water. We'd both done harder hikes, so we weren't worried about the difficulty. We packed light, water, snacks, first aid kit, emergency blanket, standard day hike gear. The morning was overcast, temperature in the low 40s. The trail started out easy, following the creek through a flat stretch of forest. We talked about work, about Olivia's boyfriend who might be proposing at Christmas, about whether I should quit my job and go back to school. Normal conversation. The forest was quiet, no other hikers visible ahead or behind us. About a mile in, we reached the ravine. The trail narrowed and began to descend, with the canyon walls rising steeply on both sides. Sandstone cliffs, striated in bands of red and brown, covered in dead vines. The light dimmed as we descended, the overcast sky blocked by the canyon rim. It got colder, our voices echoed strangely off the rocks. Olivia stopped to take photos. She's big into nature photography, always posting landscape shots on Instagram. While she was lining up a shot of the creek, I noticed something carved into the cliff face about 10 feet up. Letters or numbers, hard to see clearly from the trail. I pointed it out to her. "Probably just kids," she said. "You know, like Jason plus Katie forever, or whatever." But it bothered me. The carving was too high up to reach easily and the marks looked old, weathered by years of exposure. We continued hiking. Over the next quarter mile, I spotted more carvings, all of them high up on the cliff faces, all too weathered to read clearly. They appeared at irregular intervals, sometimes on the left wall, sometimes on the right. The trail descended to creek level. We crossed on a wooden footbridge, maybe 20 feet long, spanning a narrow section where the water moved fast over rocks. On the other side, the trail split. The main loop continued to the right, following the creek. But there was another trail branching left, unmarked, heading deeper into the ravine. "That wasn't on the map," Olivia said, checking her phone. We downloaded a trail map before leaving since cell service in the park was spotty. "Probably just a maintenance trail," I said. "Or maybe a shortcut." We should have stayed on the marked trail, but the unmarked path looked interesting and we had plenty of time. We decided to explore for just a few minutes, see where it led. The unmarked trail was narrower and less maintained. Fallen leaves covered the path, hiding roots and rocks. The ravine walls closed in tighter here, the passage barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. I could see my breath. Olivia zipped her jacket up to her chin. After maybe 200 yards, the trail opened into a small clearing. The ravine widened here, creating a circular space about 40 feet across. Vertical cliffs surrounded it on 3 sides, and the 4th side was the narrow passage we'd come through. In the center of the clearing was a ring of stones, not a natural formation, deliberately arranged, maybe 15 feet in diameter, with flat stones set on edge to form a low wall. "Some kind of fire ring," Olivia said. "Maybe. Seems big for that, though." We approached the stone ring. Inside was bare earth, no grass or leaf litter like the ground had been scraped clean. and in the center a wooden post had been driven into the earth. It stood about 6 feet tall, thick as my forearm, and carved with symbols from top to bottom. The same weathered marks I'd seen on the cliff faces, but here they were clearer. Not letters, not any language I recognized, just symbols, circles, lines, shapes that looked almost geometric. Olivia started taking photos. I walked around the perimeter of the stone ring, looking at the cliff faces. More carvings here, dozens of them covering the sandstone walls, all at roughly the same height, about 8 feet up, all deeply weathered. "We should go," I said. Something about the place felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. The air had a weight to it that made my chest feel tight. "Just a few more shots," Olivia said, crouching to get a better angle on the wooden post. That's when I noticed the bones. They were scattered around the base of the post, half buried in the dirt. Small bones like from rabbits or squirrels, but there were too many of them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, and they'd been arranged. Not randomly scattered, but placed in patterns radiating out from the post. Concentric circles of tiny bones, forming designs I couldn't quite parse. "Olivia," I said quietly, "look at this." She came over and saw the bones. Her face went pale. "What the fuck? We're leaving now." We turned to go back the way we'd come, and that's when we realized there was a problem. The narrow passage we'd entered through, I couldn't find it. The clearing was enclosed by cliffs on all sides. No openings, no trail. "It was right there," Olivia said, pointing. "Right there behind that boulder." We walked to where she was pointing. Solid cliff face, no passage. We walked the entire perimeter of the clearing, checking every section of wall, nothing. The clearing was completely enclosed. "This doesn't make sense," I said. My voice sounded strange, muffled. "We walked in. There has to be a way out." Olivia pulled out her phone. "I'll call for help." No signal. She held her phone up, waving it around, trying to catch even one bar. Nothing. We spent maybe 10 minutes searching, increasingly frantic, before we found it. Not a trail, but a gap in the cliff face we'd somehow missed. A crevice, maybe 3 feet wide, cutting through the rock. Dark inside, impossible to see how deep it went, but it was the only way out of the clearing. "We didn't come in through there," Olivia said. "I know, but it's the only option." We entered the crevice. The walls pressed in close on both sides, rough sandstone scraping our jackets. The temperature dropped again. I had to walk sideways to fit. Behind me, Olivia's breathing was fast and shallow. The crevice bent and twisted, descending slightly. After maybe 50 feet, it opened into a wider passage. This was wrong, completely wrong. The geology didn't make sense. The passage was too regular, too symmetrical. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and there were marks here too, carved into the rock, not symbols this time, handprints. Hundreds of them covering both walls, pressed into the stone like the rock had been soft when they were made. The prints varied in size, but they all had too many fingers. 6, 7, 8. "I want to go back," Olivia whispered. "There's no back. The clearing was enclosed." We kept walking. The passage continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. Then it branched. 2 passages, identical, both descending, both marked with handprints. "Which way?" Olivia asked. I didn't know. I chose left arbitrarily. We walked for another minute before the passage opened into a chamber. Large, maybe 30 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The walls were covered in carvings. Not just symbols and handprints now, but images. Crude pictographs showing figures, human figures and something else. Tall shapes with too many limbs surrounding the humans, touching them. In the center of the chamber was another wooden post, identical to the one in the clearing, but this one had something hanging from it. A rope or maybe braided leather with objects strung along its length. I moved closer, shining my phone light on it. The objects were bone. Small bones, like finger bones, strung together with what looked like sinew. They twisted slowly in a breeze I couldn't feel. "Something's in here with us," Olivia said. I turned. She was looking at the far side of the chamber where the darkness was deepest. "What do you mean?" "I can hear it. Breathing." I listened. She was right. Slow, measured breathing coming from somewhere in the darkness. Not one source, multiple sources. Synchronized, we backed toward the passage we'd entered through. The breathing continued unchanged. Then footsteps, not walking but dragging, something being pulled across stone, coming from the dark, approaching. We ran back through the passage, back to the junction. I tried to remember which way we'd come, right or left, I couldn't remember. We chose right, running as fast as the narrow space allowed. Behind us, the dragging sound grew louder, multiple things moving in unison. The passage began to climb. That felt right. We'd been descending before, so climbing should lead us out. The walls pressed closer. I had to turn sideways, had to slide through, scraping my back on the stone. Olivia was behind me, breathing hard, saying something I couldn't make out over the sound of blood rushing in my ears. Light ahead, actual daylight. The passage was opening up. I pushed forward, forcing myself through a final narrow section, and suddenly I was out. In the ravine, on the trail. The marked trail, with the wooden footbridge visible 50 yards ahead. Olivia emerged behind me, her jacket torn, face scratched from the rock. We stood there gasping, looking back at the cliff face. There was no passage, no opening, just solid sandstone wall. "What the hell?" Olivia said. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I was looking at the cliff face, at the carvings I'd noticed earlier. Up close now I could read them, not names or dates, the same symbols from the clearing, from the underground chamber. Warnings, they had to be warnings. We hiked out fast, didn't talk, didn't stop until we reached the parking lot. Olivia's car was the only one there. We sat inside with the doors locked for 10 minutes before either of us could speak. "Did that happen?" she asked. "I don't know. But when I got home and checked my jacket, I found proof." My back was covered in scratches from squeezing through the passage, and in my pocket was something I hadn't put there. A small bone, white and clean, drilled through with a hole like someone had intended to string it with others. Olivia won't talk about it. She deleted all her photos from that day, blocked me on social media when I tried to ask her about it. I drove back to Shades 2 weeks later, tried to find that unmarked trail, couldn't find it. The trail junction where we'd turned left, there was no left branch, just the main loop following the creek exactly like the map showed. But I still have the bone. I've tried to throw it away 3 times. Each time it reappears in my apartment, in my jacket pocket, on my nightstand, on my kitchen counter. And lately I've been having dreams about narrow passages, about chambers filled with carvings, about something with too many limbs reaching out from the darkness. Last night I woke up at 3 a.m. with dirt under my fingernails. My shoes were by the door, caked with mud and leaves. I don't remember going anywhere. But there's a new symbol carved into my bedroom wall, small and precise, cut into the drywall with something sharp. The same symbol from the wooden posts. Story 7. The old Illinois Central Railroad line that used to run through Vigo County was abandoned in the mid-80s. The tracks are still there, mostly overgrown, running through patches of forest and farm fields between Terre Haute and nowhere. My girlfriend at the time, Simone Dupree, and I used to walk those tracks on weekends. It was peaceful, isolated, a good place to talk without distractions. This was maybe 6 years ago, late September. We'd been walking for about an hour, following the tracks through a section of dense woods. The rails were rusty, the wooden ties rotted and sinking into the earth. Weeds grew up between them. Trees had started encroaching from both sides, their branches forming a canopy overhead. We came around a curve and saw the station house. It sat about 50 yards off the tracks, barely visible through the undergrowth. A small structure, brick with a wooden porch, the kind of local station that would have serviced small towns back when rail was the primary transportation. The windows were broken and the roof had partially collapsed, but the building was still standing. "Want to check it out?" Simone asked. She was always braver than me, more curious about abandoned places. We left the tracks and pushed through the brush to the station house. Up close, it was in worse shape than I'd thought. The porch had rotted through in places, and one whole wall was covered in graffiti. But the main structure seemed solid enough. The door was missing, just an empty frame opening into darkness. Inside smelled like rotten animal waste. The main room was maybe 20 by 20 feet, empty except for an old wooden bench and some trash left by previous explorers. Beer cans, cigarette butts, a moldy sleeping bag in one corner. The ticket window was still intact. A small opening in one wall with bars across it. Simone was taking photos with her phone. "This is cool, very post-apocalyptic." I was looking at the walls. Someone had painted words on them, spray paint in faded red and black. "Stay out, don't sleep here, not safe." And underneath those warnings, older writing, scratched into the brick with something sharp. Numbers, dates, I realized, going back to 1983. Next to each date was a tally mark. 1 mark, 2 marks, 3. The most recent date I could see was from 2 years ago. 11 tally marks next to it. "Simone, look at this." She came over and examined the scratches. "What do you think it means?" "I don't know. Count of something. People who stayed here." She looked uncomfortable. "Like how many nights?" "Maybe." There was a door at the back of the room, partially open. It led to a smaller space, maybe an office or storage room. I pushed the door wider and looked in. The room was darker, the only window completely boarded up. My eyes adjusted slowly. There was a desk in there, broken and tilted to one side, and on the floor, arranged in a circle, were stones. Smooth river stones, each about the size of a fist. In the center of the circle was something else, a pile of bones. "Okay, we're leaving," I said. "What is it?" "Just bones, animal bones, but we should go." We left the station house and made our way back to the tracks. Neither of us talked much on the walk back to the car. That night, Simone asked me if I thought the bones were really from animals. I said I didn't know, didn't want to think about it. 3 days later, Simone called me at work. "I think someone's been in our apartment." "What do you mean?" "Things are moved, not taken, just rearranged. And there are rocks on the kitchen counter, 3 of them, smooth like river rocks." I told her to call the police, report a break-in. But when the cops came, they said there was no sign of forced entry. The rocks were just rocks. Probably something Simone had brought home and forgotten about. She got angry at them for not taking it seriously, and they left with nothing filed. The rocks kept appearing. Every few days more would show up on the counter, on the bathroom sink, once arranged in a circle around our bed while we were sleeping. Simone wanted to move. I didn't want to overreact. I convinced her it was someone pranking us, maybe a neighbor with a spare key. We had the locks changed. The rocks kept coming. A week after the locks were changed, I woke up at 2 a.m. Simone was gone from the bed. I found her standing in the living room staring at the wall. She'd drawn symbols on it with a marker, circles and lines, spirals and geometric patterns. She was still holding the marker, drawing more. "Simone." She turned to look at me. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing me. She was sleepwalking. I'd never seen her sleepwalk before. I guided her back to bed, and in the morning she had no memory of it. But the symbols were there on the wall, drawn in thick black marker. I took photos of them and tried to research what they might mean. Nothing conclusive. They looked vaguely Native American or maybe Celtic, but mostly they just looked like the random doodlings of someone not fully conscious. Except they matched the carvings we'd seen on the cliffs at Shade State Park and the symbols on the wooden posts. No, wait, I'm mixing up memories. This was before the Shades trip, before I found that bone. This was the railroad station, the abandoned station house. I'm getting confused. Simone started losing time. She'd be getting ready for work, and suddenly it would be 3 hours later and she'd be standing in the kitchen with no memory of the time passing. She'd find dirt under her fingernails, mud on her shoes, but no memory of going outside. Her phone would have photos on it she didn't remember taking. Pictures of the railroad tracks, pictures of the station house. Pictures taken from inside the back room showing the circle of stones and the pile of bones. I wanted her to see a doctor. She refused, said it was stress, said she just needed to relax, but she was scared. I could see it in her eyes. 2 weeks after our visit to the station house, Simone disappeared. I woke up at 6 a.m. and she was gone. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her phone was on the nightstand. Her shoes were by the door. She'd left in the middle of the night, barefoot, wearing only pajamas. I called the police. They put out a missing person report, organized a search. I told them about the station house, about the rocks, about the sleepwalking. They went to check the station. I went with them. The main room was empty, same as before. The back room with the circle of stones, the bones were gone. In their place was a pile of clothes. Simone's pajamas folded neatly in the center of the circle. The police treated it as a crime scene. They searched the surrounding woods, brought in dogs, checked the railroad tracks for miles in both directions. They found nothing, no body, no evidence of struggle, just her clothes in that circle of stones. They questioned me, obviously. Boyfriend's always the first suspect, but I had an alibi. My roommate confirmed I'd been home all night. Eventually, they had to accept that I didn't know what happened to her. 3 months later, a hiker found a body in the woods about 4 miles from the station house. Female, deceased for several months. They identified her through dental records. It was Simone. The autopsy couldn't determine cause of death. No trauma, no evidence of violence, no drugs or toxins in her system. She just stopped, like her body had shut down for no reason. The medical examiner ruled it undetermined and the case went cold. I moved away from Terre Haute 6 months later. Couldn't stand being in that apartment, driving past those woods. I ended up in Bloomington, tried to start over, but things followed me. I still find the rocks. Smooth river stones appearing in my apartment. I'll wake up and they'll be arranged on the kitchen counter or around my bed or in a circle in the living room. I've moved 3 times, changed cities. The rocks keep finding me, and I've been sleepwalking. I know because I set up cameras. I watch the footage in the morning and I see myself getting out of bed at 2 or 3 a.m., walking to the wall, drawing symbols with whatever's available, marker, pen, sometimes my own fingernails scratching into the drywall. The same symbols, over and over. Last week I woke up and I wasn't in my apartment. I was standing on railroad tracks, barefoot, wearing only pajamas, the old Illinois Central line. I was a mile from my car and I had no memory of driving there or walking. My feet were bloody from the gravel between the ties, and I could see the station house in the distance. Someone was standing on the porch. A figure too far away to identify, but I knew who it was. I knew. I ran, got back to my car somehow, drove home, haven't gone back. But last night I woke up and my shoes were by the door, caked in mud and leaves, and my phone had new photos, pictures of the station house, pictures of the back room, pictures of the circle of stones. And in the center of the circle, in the most recent photo, was a pile of my own clothes, folded neatly. I don't know how much time I have left. Story 8. I work for the Department of Natural Resources, doing wildlife surveys and habitat assessments in state forests. It's mostly boring work, walking transects through the woods, counting deer tracks, checking camera traps for population data. But it pays okay, and I like being outside. In early April, I got assigned to survey a section of Hoosier National Forest, specifically an area near Pauli that hadn't been assessed in over 10 years. The forest supervisor warned me the area was difficult to access. The old logging roads had washed out and the terrain was rough, steep hillsides, dense undergrowth, lots of limestone outcroppings. He said previous survey crews had complained about equipment malfunctions and navigation issues. His advice was to stick to the marked transects and not wander off. I went in solo, which was standard for this kind of work. I'm 31, been doing DNR work for about 7 years. I've been in plenty of remote forests alone. This didn't seem any different. The access point was a gravel pull-off about 15 miles south of Pauli at the end of a fire road. I parked my truck, loaded my pack with GPS unit, camera, water, and supplies for 2 days. The survey area was roughly 6 square miles, and I had 12 transects to walk. If I moved efficiently, I could finish in a day and a half. The forest was beautiful. Early spring, with wildflowers starting to bloom and the canopy just beginning to leaf out. I could hear wood thrushes and warblers, see squirrel sign everywhere. Normal, healthy forest. The first 3 transects went smoothly. I marked locations, photographed habitat features, recorded observations. On the 4th transect, I found the orchard. It appeared suddenly, a clearing in the forest that wasn't marked on any map. Maybe 2 acres of open space filled with old apple trees. The trees were ancient, gnarled, and twisted, many of them hollow or fallen. But some were still alive, covered in fresh blooms. Apple trees don't grow wild in Indiana forests. Someone had planted these probably a century ago, maybe a homestead that had been reclaimed by the forest. I walked through the orchard, curious. The ground was uneven, covered in long grass and fallen branches. I found the remains of a stone foundation near the center, just a rectangular outline of stacked rocks, mostly collapsed. Someone's house, long gone, and I found the well. It was off to one side of the foundation, marked by a circle of stones. The opening was maybe 4 feet across, and I couldn't see the bottom. I dropped a stone down and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds before I heard a splash. Deep well, probably 60 feet. But the weird thing was the cover. Someone had built a wooden frame over the well, and stretched across the frame was metal mesh, heavy gauge, like security fencing. And the mesh had been secured with chains and padlocks. Multiple locks, all rusted but still holding. Why would someone lock a well? I took photos, marked the location on my GPS, made a note to report the structure to the forest supervisor. It could be a safety hazard if hikers stumbled onto it. Then I continued my survey, walking the rest of the 4th transect and moving on to the 5th. That's when my GPS started acting up. The unit couldn't lock onto satellites. The position kept jumping around. I tried restarting it, checking for obstructions, but nothing helped. Without GPS, I'd have to navigate by compass and map, which was slower but doable, except my compass was spinning. The needle wouldn't settle, just rotated slowly, pointing in random directions. I tried tapping the case, holding it level, moving to different locations. Same problem. I'm not someone who panics easily. Malfunctioning equipment is annoying but manageable. I had a paper map. I could navigate by landmarks and backtrack to my truck if needed. But something felt wrong. The forest had gotten too quiet. No birds, no wind, just silence. I decided to head back to the truck, regroup, maybe come back the next day with fresh batteries and backup equipment. I started walking what I thought was west, following a ridgeline. After 20 minutes, I came to the orchard again. That didn't make sense. I'd been walking away from the orchard, not toward it. I checked my position, tried to orient using the sun, which was visible through breaks in the canopy. West was definitely to my right. I adjusted my course and started walking again. 15 minutes later, the orchard appeared in front of me. Same clearing, same apple trees, same locked well. I stopped and forced myself to think logically. I was going in circles. The terrain was confusing, or I was misreading the sun's position. I needed to pick a direction and stick to it, not keep adjusting. I found a landmark, a distinctive triple-trunked oak tree, and started walking directly toward it, keeping it in sight. I reached the oak tree, passed it, kept walking. The forest went on unchanging. More oaks, more undergrowth, limestone outcrops. I walked for 40 minutes, checking my watch periodically. By now I should have reached the edge of the survey area, should be seeing the fire road or at least the change in forest type that indicated the boundary. Instead, I found the orchard again. Same clearing, same trees, same well with its locked cover. I walked to the stone foundation and sat down, trying to control the fear rising in my chest. This wasn't possible. I'd been walking in a straight line, had kept a landmark in sight, had covered at least 2 miles. I couldn't be in the same place, but I was. I recognized specific trees, the pattern of stones in the foundation. This was the same orchard. The sun was getting low, maybe 2 hours until sunset. I did not want to be in these woods after dark. I pulled out my phone, no signal, which was expected. But I had a downloaded map app that worked offline. I opened it, tried to get a position. The app showed me in the middle of the survey area, roughly where the orchard should be. I zoomed out, looking for the nearest road. The screen flickered. The map tiles started loading wrong, showing terrain that didn't match. I zoomed in and out, trying to refresh it. The app crashed. When I reopened it, the map showed something different. The survey area was there, but the orchard was marked. It appeared on the map as a perfect circle of white space, like a void in the satellite imagery. And around that circle, the app had drawn text, "No exit." I stared at that screen, trying to process what I was seeing. The app didn't have functionality to add text or annotations. This shouldn't be possible. Something moved at the edge of the clearing. I looked up. A figure stood among the apple trees, maybe 30 yards away. Tall, wearing dark clothes, watching me. "Hey," I called out, "I'm with the DNR. I'm doing a wildlife survey. Can you help me navigate out of here?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there perfectly still. I stood up and started walking toward them. As I got closer, details resolved. It wasn't wearing clothes. Its skin was dark, bark-like, covered in texture that looked more vegetable than animal. Its proportions were wrong: torso too long, arms too thin, head too small, and it was growing out of the ground. Roots extended from its feet into the earth, spreading like veins through the grass. I stopped walking. The thing tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement. Other figures began emerging from the tree line around the clearing. 6, 8, 10 of them, all growing from the ground, all watching me. I backed toward the well, keeping them in sight. They didn't follow, just stood there, a circle of watching figures rooted to the earth. I reached the well and crouched behind it, my back pressed against the stone circle. My heart was hammering, breath coming fast. The figures began to move, not walking, growing. They extended toward me, bodies stretching, limbs elongating, roots tearing free from the ground and reaching like fingers. They moved slowly but inexorably, closing the circle around me. I looked at the well, at the locked metal mesh covering it. The mesh was strong, but the wood frame it was attached to was old and rotting. I grabbed the chains and pulled, throwing my full weight backward. The frame cracked. I pulled again. Wood splintered. The mesh and frame tore free, falling to the side of the well. The opening was 4 feet across, big enough. I didn't think, didn't plan. I just climbed onto the stone circle and jumped. The fall lasted forever. I had time to think about how stupid this was, jumping into a 60-foot well to escape hallucinations. Time to think about how much hitting the bottom would hurt, whether I'd break my legs or my back. Time to regret every decision that led to this moment. I hit water hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. The well was flooded, the water shockingly cold. I went under, came up gasping, treading water. Above me, I could see the circle of sky, rapidly darkening. Silhouetted against that sky, figures leaning over the edge, looking down. They didn't follow me into the well. I floated there for maybe 10 minutes, waiting. The figures remained above, watching. Eventually, they withdrew, moving back from the edge. The sky darkened further. I couldn't stay in the water. I was already shaking from the cold, my fingers going numb. There was no way to climb out. The walls were smooth stone, slick with moss. No handholds, no way to get purchase. I was going to die in this well. Drown or freeze. I don't know how long I was in the water. An hour, 2. Time became elastic. I lost feeling in my legs, my arms. Hypothermia was setting in. My thoughts got fuzzy. I remember thinking about my apartment, about my sister's wedding next month, about whether anyone would find my truck. And then I saw a light, a flashlight beam sweeping across the opening of the well. Voices, someone calling my name. I tried to shout back, but my voice came out as a croak. I tried again, louder. The light stopped, focused on me. Holy shit, he's down there. They lowered a rope. Took 3 of them to pull me up. I was so weak and waterlogged. They were Forest Service rangers doing a sweep of the area because my truck had been parked at the access point past checkout time. They wrapped me in emergency blankets, got me to their vehicle, drove me to the hospital in Pauli, treated me for hypothermia and exposure, kept me overnight for observation. The rangers asked what happened. I told them I fell into a well while doing my survey, got disoriented trying to climb out. They went back the next day to document the site for a safety report. They couldn't find it. No orchard, no apple trees, no stone foundation, no well. The survey area was continuous forest, no clearings. The GPS coordinates I'd marked showed nothing but mature oak hickory woodland, but my clothes were wet. I had bruises from the fall. The rangers had definitely pulled me out of a well. It had to be there. The DNR sent a follow-up crew with ground-penetrating radar. They surveyed the entire area. No subsurface structures, no voids indicating a well or foundation, nothing. I've been on administrative leave since then, recovering from the accident officially, but really they're trying to figure out what happened. My supervisor thinks I got disoriented, maybe fell in a sinkhole with water at the bottom. The rangers insist they pulled me from a well, but they can't prove it existed. I still have the photos on my camera. The orchard, the apple trees, the locked well. When I show them to people, they see different things. My supervisor sees a normal forest. My sister sees static. The ranger who pulled me out sees an empty clearing with burnt ground like something was on fire there. I don't go into the forests anymore. Can't. Every time I try, I end up back at the edge of that orchard, even when I'm miles from the survey area, even when I'm in different forests. The orchard finds me, and the apple trees are blooming even though it's summer now, even though they shouldn't bloom twice in 1 year, even though when I get close enough, I can see the fruit starting to form and the fruit looks wrong, shaped like faces, like hands reaching up through the branches. I can see them growing. Due to length constraints, I need to continue with the remaining stories. Would you like me to continue with stories 9-14?